We haven't seen any polling out of the debate just yet. It'll probably take a few days to see if there'll be any impact. But where the numbers are right now in the poll tracker, an average of all the polls that are out there, we still have a very tight race between the Liberals and the Conservatives, each at about 34% support. And I think when you look further down the list, you see that the New Democrats are at about 13% and the Greens are at about 11%. It's a pretty close race between them as well. And I think that gives a little bit of context of some of the fighting we saw between Elizabeth May and Jagmeet Singh in last night's debate. They know that they are fighting over a lot of the same voters, and each of them were trying to convince maybe the audience that they are the ones that can carry their progressive, hopes and dreams into this campaign. So it was an interesting debate between the two of them.
Presumably more impactful on viewer intention once Justin Trudeau joins the fray in October. But what do we know typically or traditionally, Eric, about whether debates do provide any momentum?
They often have in the past, or at least they have an impact in the short term. It's always about whether you can capitalize on that going forward. And often a debate can be something that helps momentum continue. We saw that in a number of campaigns, and Justin Trudeau in 2015 was able to use each of the debates to help keep his party gaining in the polls. But I think often what you see in debates is that it's more of a risk than a reward. If you think about, for example, the 2015 Alberta provincial election campaign, that math is hard comment that Rachel Notley was able to use to really help propel her party to that election win. A debate this early in the campaign with the incumbent Prime Minister not there, unlikely to move the dial very much, but for those who would have tuned in, maybe a little bit of an appetizer to what they're going to get for the next few weeks.
Okay. Some of the things that we have seen as far as platform releases in these first 3 days, this is not everything, but we have seen, for example, the Liberals, the first-time home buyers program. We're going to see today from the NDP, we anticipate their platform to lower cell phone and internet bills. So we're talking the pocketbook issues that we had spoken at the outset are likely to be a focus through this campaign. What does the polling tell us about whether that's what Canadians want to hear about?
It seems like that is what a lot of Canadians want to hear about. Affordability issues and cost of living has topped many polls in terms of what is a top concern for Canadians, and it does reflect what happens historically, that people are usually concerned about their own personal finances. We often talk about how the economy is something that decides an election. I think for a lot of individual voters, it's often more about their own personal economy and how they perceive that it's going is more of a reflection of how their own finances are going rather than that of the country. So I think we're definitely seeing the parties lean into that. Andrew Scheer is almost certainly going to be only talking about affordability. It's part of their own campaign slogan. But it is interesting, for example, that Jagmeet Singh, one of his announcements was about a hospital in Brampton. It shows how the NDP might have to be a bit more targeted in the promises that they're making, because they are at this stage at least having to be a bit more selective in where they're trying to make some gains rather than a broader approach nationwide. Yeah,
that was interesting. Raise some eyebrows with that hyper-local platform promise yesterday in Brampton. So pocketbook issues, and you mentioned that's what Andrew Scheer is really going to be talking about, and yet he's already had to answer questions about Bill 21, the secularism law in Quebec, and he's certainly been talking about SNC-Lavalin again. So remind us of, again, in the polls that you're seeing, whether those are figuring in Canadians' minds.
Yeah, it's it's best laid plans, right? It doesn't always work out that way. For SNC-Lavalin, we didn't really see any impact from the Ethics Commissioner's report earlier in the summer. Certainly the story is the reason we're in a close race, because at the beginning of the year, the Liberals had a lead over the Conservatives, and they looked to be cruising to re-election. And the damage from the controversy is what is making this a competitive election. So we'll see if the news from this week is going to have any impact or not, because it didn't in the summer when this re-emerged through the Commissioner's report. On Bill 21, why it's a bit of a delicate balancing act for a lot of the leaders is that while it's very popular in Quebec, it has had a lot of criticism outside of the province. There are some people who do support that kind of legislation in the rest of the country as well, but it is primarily in Quebec that you see that this is very popular. So all of the parties know that if they go too hard against it, they might risk losing some of these francophone swing voters in Quebec that will have a huge impact on deciding who gets to be Prime Minister.
All right. We're watching some key Quebec ridings today with leaders all in, or most of them in that area today. One more point which is related to that, Eric, and that, again, SNC-Lavalin, what the Conservatives and what the opposition party has been trying to make of that, goes to questions of integrity, goes to questions of leadership. We're hearing from our viewers, we're hearing many Canadians as we send out our cameras already on this day 3 saying that is really something that matters to them very much. Leaders who tell the truth, those key character issues and ethics issues. Again, where does that figure in your polling at this early stage?
Well, the polling that we can see, it certainly suggests that that is one of the issues in this campaign. Maybe not one of the top issues, but I think it's because while it's the kind of thing that colors people's views of a leader, and so while they might be thinking that it's the election is going to be decided on the climate change or the economy, a lot of people, it's their gut feeling about how they perceive a leader, and so these kinds of questions can be really key in shaping people's perceptions of a leader, so that if they don't trust you to begin with, it doesn't matter what your promises are on the economy or immigration or climate change. That is really key. It's really important for a lot of voters. It's a choice between leaders. It's a leader-focused elections that we have, and there's a reason for that, because people really do assign a lot of value onto that. Whether or not we see it in the polling, a lot of people say it's about platforms and parties and that kind of thing, but when it comes down to it, it is often just a gut check. People have to ask themselves, who do I trust to run the country for the next 4 years?